Last Saturday morning, an intrepid band of us did a walk over Bowen Hills, and some of them are here today. Hands up. There we are. If I miss anything, you let me know if I've missed anything out. Bowen Hills is, the prominence above Breakfast Creek Road has enjoyed a variety of names, including Mount Pleasant, O'Reilly's Hill, Montpelier Heights, before being given the name that honoured Queensland's new governor, appointed in 1859. These days the spots are sometimes called Tenerife Heights. And needless to say, Cloudland Ballroom, though long gone, has been emblematic of the location. Now, where did we go? This photograph from 1942, we'll use it as a reference. There's the gas ring, which is a centrepiece of Gasworks Plaza today, and it was fed from a gasworks there with the chimney. So the coal was burnt there, and a pipeline took the gas to the chamber there, to the storage point, and later on there were more storage points. So we started there, and we crossed down to Breakfast Creek Road, and we followed Breakfast Creek Road along there, and then we took a track up here past where the old Cloudland was. There's Cloudland there, and we followed a street right down here, and then we came up Cintra Road past the Twelfth Night Theatre, up Boyd Street, up to, we looked at Cintra, that house there. We walked up as far as we could to the highest point of the hill, and then we walked down here to the church, Our Lady of Victories church there, and we followed a few streets just off the map, back to Breakfast Creek Road, and we found a coffee shop just about there somewhere. Okay. So in the course of about 29 slides, we'll work our way along that track. Just a note about that, the gas ring. In the 2000s, when that land was being redeveloped, there was talk of that being demolished. But it's thanks to Councillor David Hinchliffe that that the heritage value of that was preserved, and now it's a centrepiece. And but for that remainder, people wouldn't know what gasworks meant. So that's where we started, and then we crossed Breakfast Creek Road at Montpelier Road there, and some of you will remember that there was a railway line which ran from Bowen Hills down to the waterfront, and it ran all the way to the powerhouse, and there were many sidings on the way. But the problem was getting a train across Breakfast Creek Road. So some of you will remember the man with the bell and the red flag who had to stop the traffic somehow so that trains could come across. From there we walk along Breakfast Creek Road, and there's an Art Deco building there, Evoked Flats, dating from 1935, and everyone remembers that. As they're driving past, they often ask, what do you know about Evoked Flats? Well, unfortunately, I can't tell them much. It's just been there for a long time. And gradually it's getting built in. Buildings have progressively come closer to it. That used to be a grey wall along the road, and in 2019, a man who used to be a graffiti artist, now a well-acclaimed artist, was asked to paint that, and it's called Ebb and Flow. And the blue band represents the Brisbane River's serpentine route. And someone was thoughtful enough to plant some beautiful hibiscus all the way along that wall, and they're very bright colours, so somehow it complements the colour. So we're walking along towards Newstead, and then we come to a set of stairs off Breakfast Creek Road, and as you're buzzing along the road, you hardly notice it's there. But when you take a step up, that's where you come to, and that's Cowlishaw Street, which is a very steep climb. And we took that very slowly, you know, because it is a bit taxing. And then if we stood at that point and looked back towards Breakfast Creek Road, we've got the chance to think of what was there beforehand. And this was the benefit, in a way, of this. I know this will be repeating history for some of you, for those of you who were with us last week, where we walked the walk. But in talking the walk, I can show you some photos of what we couldn't show last week, one of which is this photo. And there you can see the gas plant on the river with the chimney over on the right-hand side. And some clowns have got in a boat and went sailing. This is the 1893 flood. When in February that year there were 3 cyclones. So the river came up, it went down, it came up, it went down, it came up and went down. So whoever was in the boat, you know, in pubs for the rest of their life, they would have said, "We sailed along Breakfast Creek Road." This is a scene from 1918, a bit later. Again, there's our, you know, the gas frame of gasworks, and way over here on the left at the top, you can see the actual gas works. And Brown and Broad was a very prosperous timber merchant, and Boyd Brown, who was a great-grandson, I think, of the founder, the Mr. Brown, he gave a talk here about a year ago. And that talk is on the website of the Society. You know that you can look at many of the previous talks and see them on Vimeo. So you could, if you're interested, you could see this. Brown and Broad, Boyd talked about the fact that there was a division of Brown and Broad called Newstead Homes, where they would send kit homes out. You could look at their kit book and go through, choose your home, pick that one, and all the timber and everything would be delivered to your site with a book of instructions, and away you go, you build your own home. Them were the days, eh? So now we go back and we're trying to walk up that very steep Cowlishaw Street, but had it been the days of Cloudland, we would have been helped by the fact that there's a funicular. In other words, it runs up the tracks. There are 2 cars. As one gets to the top, the other one's at the bottom, and they go up and down like that on a cable. The engineers among us will be able to tell us more precisely what that's all about. And you can see that the outside part of it is open so that the people could enjoy the view as they go up and down. Now we get on to Cloudland itself. Cloudland Cloudland was the idea of this man, T.H. Eslick, who was a sort of a promoter. He's got a long history. Some of it, there's a lot of self-promotion, so it's hard to know exactly how much was fact. He purported to be an engineer. He did go bankrupt a couple of times, but nevertheless, it was his idea to put up a sort of amusement place. It would have an observatory, cafe, fun park, all sorts of things. But the centrepiece was the biggest dance floor in Australia. The council allowed him to go ahead in the late 30s. By the 1940s, it's operational, and then came the war and some money difficulties, and the project sort of stopped. And then when the Americans were here during the Second World War, the facility, which had been mainly completed, was taken over by them and known as Camp Luna. And then once the war was over, it got going as a dance hall, and I guess there would be a lot of people here who've danced at Cloudland. Hands up. Okay, that's a pretty fair showing, isn't it? And there might even be some people who've sat exams at Cloudland. Okay. And you could feel the floor bounce as the invigilator walked past your desk. Yes. Okay. So that's Cloudland, and this is a photo of the entrance to Cloudland, and the big arch, the very characteristic, was on the skyline of Brisbane. Now, one of the members who couldn't be here today, Lorraine Tomlinson, she wanted to send this photo to me, and she gave the explanation. My mother designed and made all of my costumes, and I sewed on all the sequins. On one occasion, Mum made a Latin American dance frock in 3 hours. I have so many happy memories of Cloudland. And that's her partner. She would go to a dance school. I can't remember the name of the dance school, in preparation for going to the dance at Cloudland. So, you know, a generation took this very seriously. And around Brisbane, how many are there dance cards just like that one, with the little postcard, the photo, and so on? So here we are back at Cowlishaw Street, and just as we get to that point where the lamppost is, we turn right, and there's this memorial. It's called the Cloudland Memorial, dating from 2004, and I would say David Hinchliffe would have had something to do with getting that established. And there's the characteristic arch as a reminder, and there are various information panels on the sides of it, and on the floor you can see there's a surface there. I'll show you in a minute. There are tiles with little messages on them. And one of the messages is about Montpelier, which was a large house built by Mr. Henry O'Reilly. He was a sea captain and apparently Queensland's first astronomer. And after him, so it became known as O'Reilly's Hill as a result of, you know, his house. And then it was bought by Mr. Cowlishaw, and it was in the Cowlishaw family for a long time. And he added a story to it. He was a businessman, politician, newspaper owner, and he had a big family. And when he and his wife had a wedding anniversary in 1912, they could comfortably invite over 300 to the party. So that's why we have Cowlishaw Street and why we have Montpelier Road. Now, after Mr. Cowlishaw's death in 1929, the place sort of lay vacant, and in 1936, a proposition was put to the council that the house and the grounds be taken over as a public park. But the council weren't interested, it just languished, and then that's when Mr. Eslick came in with his idea for Cloudland. As I said, there are some tiled messages on the bottom of the memorial, and here's two that I thought might interest you. The one on the left says, "I was there on Cloudland's opening night. Billow Smith and another band played continuous music. After a while, the centre of the dance floor collapsed and dropped down about 18 inches. We kept right on dancing, down and up again." And the other one says, "When I was 14, I teased a girlfriend about going to Cloudland because it was boring. Her mother overheard and said, 'You're coming with us. I'll show you ballroom dancing isn't boring.' I loved it and went twice a week for years. I moved back to Brisbane on the Saturday, and on the Sunday, Cloudland was pulled down." Now, two of our walking members, Oriana and Ivana, where are they? There they are at the back. They grew up on Bowen Hills, and they relate the story that their father one night in November 1982 heard a rumble in the night, thinking it was thunder, went out and checked the sky, it was clear, and went back to bed. And the next morning, when he went and opened the front door and looked at the skyline of Bowen Hills, there was something missing. In the wee hours, the Dean brothers had come along and done their demolition.
What year was that?
1982, the 7th of November.
Yep.
There's been a song written about it, you know, there was, and and one of the messages on the memorial says, "The chair of Brisbane City Council's Heritage Committee called it a criminal act. I met my wife there," he added, while Courier Mail journalist Don Peterson said Cloudland was of no great architectural merit and quoted architect Robin Gibson, demolition is only part of the renewal. So the renewal that's taken place is that Cloudland apartments are on the top of it. And I took a walk up there again this week just to take a few more photos, and I ran into a woman who I know, and she and her husband live there. I said, what's it like living up here? She said, it's very quiet, we love it. So there you have it. So we continue along Cowlishaw Street, heading towards Cintra Road, and we note some houses on the right, very precipitous yards, and then we come to the intersection, and as we turn up Cintra Road, I thought this photo would interest you. This is the intersection. There's Cintra Road, Abbotsford Road is on the other side of this property, and Montpelier is coming up in front. This house was known as Miegunyah, and this is a view in 1883. It was built by one of those families who had a big property out west, and this was their town pad. And that's often a characteristic of this area. People had a big property out west, and when they wanted to come to the city, or the children needed educating, they would have a house in New Farm or this area. So Miegunyah came into that category. In the 1920s, it was owned by the Mant family, M-A-N-T, and during the Second World War, it was requisitioned by the Women's Royal Air Force for a hostel for women airmen or in the Air Force. The daughter of that household was Marjorie Mant, and she was a well-known actress at the time, and she married a man named Brian Johnstone. And they were interested in art, and this is in the 1950s then, and for about 20 years or more, they ran the Johnstone Galleries. And that was regarded as a really a landmark sort of offering, because it brought to the fore artists who weren't well known. And this is at a time when Brisbane was regarded as a bit of a backwater artistically. And I'll just read you out a message here to demonstrate that. This is quoting Betty Churcher. Betty Churcher described Brisbane in the mid-50s as a populated rock pool after the tide has gone out. Now, she was my art teacher when I was in Year 8, so I can't say anything against her. Robert Hughes has a sharper tongue, and he described Brisbane in the 1960s in even more unflattering but equally evocative terms, perched on stilts beside its tepid river, smelling of hot metal and tar. It seems further from Sydney than Sydney does from Paris. The art community there has something of the atmosphere of a moonshine settlement in the Ozarks, meaning backwards people, hemmed in by public philistinism. That'd be typical Robert Hughes, eh? So the Johnstones, displayed artists who would later become household names. For example, Blackman, Boyd, Rupert Bunny, Ray Crook, Lawrence Dawes, Drysdale, Donald Friend, John Mulvig, Sidney Nolan, Margaret Olley, Clifton Pugh, Lloyd Rees, and so on.
Yeah.
Now, let's move further up. I should say that the Twelfth Night Theatre would sit at about this point on the street, because Marjorie was good friends with the theatre world, and they sold the land for the building of the Twelfth Night Theatre. This is in 1969, and then eventually and there it is built. There's the nameplate there, opened by Gordon Chalk in 69, and then Gale Wiltshire has owned it from 1988. It was at a point where in 1988 it could have just gone, but Gail and her husband got together the funds, and they've had it ever since. I went to a performance there in May, and it's a great place to go to. And on previous walking tours, we've been lucky enough to have been given a mini tour by the man in the box office, Lewis Savage, and he's a local. And sometimes we've even been able to have a quick peek into the theatre because there's a rehearsal going on, that sort of thing. So we couldn't manage that on Saturday, never mind. So we're climbing up Boyd Street now, and on the right-hand side is the driveway into Cloudland Apartments. And you can just see the tip of the church on the horizon at the top there. This is the finest house on the top of Bowen Hills. This is Cintra House, dating from 1863. Its most famous owner was Boyd Dunlop Moorhead, a pastoralist, businessman and politician, and he was Premier in 1888 to 1890. He was the kind of man who stated, "God made the country, but the devil made the towns." With his first wife, they had 7 daughters, and when she died, he married again and had another daughter. So he had to extend the house, and part of the extension was building another building behind it, which is the kind of the pink building you can see at the back there. And so that housed servants and so on. And then in 1925, they divided that off as a separate house. So today, the White House and the Pink House are 2 separate dwellings. In latter times, the big house, Cintra, has been a convent for the nuns connected to the church, and it's been Cintra Galleries, which before it moved to Milton, and today it's privately owned. This house, if you looked from the veranda in 1873, that would be the pastoral view down the hill, and you can just make out in the distance there the faint outline of a building. That was the Brisbane Hospital, opened in 1867. So that's Bowen Bridge Road all the way over there. And down here you would expect to find Abbotsford Road today, you'd expect to find the railway, and then you'd expect to find the tangle of roads of the inner city bypass and everything. So that's what Brisbane used to look like once. Now this Cintra has its brush with celebrity because Mr. Moorhead had a niece named Margaret Gough. She was née Moorhead, and she had a daughter, Helen Lyndon Gough, who was born in Maryborough. And Helen became a writer, and her pen name she adopted was Pamela Lyndon Travers. And I can see some nodding voices there because Miss Travers' most famous character was a Miss Poppins, and there's Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins achieved real fame when Hollywood wanted to do something, and the author wasn't very happy with the treatment, but she had a meeting with Walt Disney and Julie Andrews, and the rest was history. Yep. So now, if anyone's not busy on the 3rd or the 2nd of July, there's the Maryborough Mary Poppins Festival this year. So Mary Poppins is alive and well. And we don't know if P.L. Travers ever visited the house on Bowen Hills, but we can imagine that, you know, at some point her mother pointed to the summit of Bowen Hills and said, "That's where my uncle, the Premier, once lived." Now we come to that, the other part, the house called Cintra, which was once part of the big house and now a separate house. During the Second World War, as you know, many houses around Brisbane were requisitioned, you know, for military units and so on, and that house was requisitioned for a military photographic lab. And one day they had a visit from the general's wife, who's in the dark clothing on the left there, and she brought along her Chinese servant, and there's the gatepost to Cintra, and there's the gatepost, and sometimes on our walks people like to get themselves photographed in a similar position to where Mrs. MacArthur was. And on the right-hand side is Mrs. MacArthur's son, Arthur MacArthur, and he's standing with the General's aide-de-camp. In terms of Arthur MacArthur, he had to be a bit of a celebrity because he was right there in the, in the war zone. And Life magazine made Arthur their cover story in August 1942 and reported on such matters as the boy's life in Australia and his curiously mixed up accent, because he'd been in the Philippines as well, his kindergarten routine and his new tricycle. Now there's a man in the audience who has met Arthur MacArthur. Would that man like to put his hand up, please? There it is. Jim McDonald, that gentleman there, has met Arthur MacArthur. Buttonhole him over coffee and ask him the story. On the subject of, wartime connections, I found a posting on Facebook where a man said, my Aunt Jean was living in Jordan Terrace, Bowen Hills during the war, and she was romantically involved with an American soldier who was a reconnaissance photographer. The airman disappeared on a mission and she never heard from him again. In wartime, only next of kin were informed about deaths and disappearances, and this caused her great distress all her life. And that must have happened countless times in Brisbane, where people met an American serviceman at a dance or something like that, got friendly, and then they just disappear. And it might be months and months later that they found out what happened. By the way, these photos are courtesy of, and the photo on the first slide are courtesy of Roger Marks, who is a retired engineer, and he set about on a project once to survey all the airstrips around Queensland which had been used during wartime. And he discovered that there was a whole cache of photographs in Washington at their National Archives, all taken of Brisbane, because if there were so many American units here, they had to document their activities. The best way to do that's photographically, and they had very good cameras and very good film. So all these photos of Brisbane are there in Washington, and he was hoping that someone like Rupert Murdoch would agree to digitise them and make them available to everyone. And because that didn't come about, he decided to put together a set of booklets, more than 26 booklets, about different subjects, mainly in Brisbane, like Cloudland, Brett's Wharf, Newstead House, showing what it was like in 1942 and what it was like now. So he's the one who found these photos and then went up to Cintra and met the host, met the owner and so on. So thank you to Roger Marks. You can find him on the internet. Our Lady of Victories Church. What a lovely photograph taken by Bruna. Bruna, who's on the society, came on the walk to make sure we didn't lose anyone, and she took some lovely photographs on the go. The first foundation stone was laid in 1919, and eventually the church was built in 1925 by Hall and Prentice, and Hall, those are the architects who built the City Hall in 1930. After the Second World War, the church became connected to the Polish community, and there's a very sobering memorial on the right-hand side to commemorate the deaths of many Poles, in Europe. Yes, in the aftermath of the Second World War. That's the scene from the car park of the church. It's a panoramic view, and the man who built a house where the church is was William Perry. He was a prominent businessman in Brisbane. The house was called Folkestone, and so the land rolled down, and where Perry Park today is where their cows grazed. He wanted to build a house in the 1880s for his son, and just on the left-hand corner here, you can see a part of a building, and that's Miegunyah, which you would have heard about it in Bowen Hills. between the church and Miegunyah there's a street called Roach Avenue. So we walked down to Roach Avenue, we went along that way, and we turned the corner into another street named Jordan Terrace, and there we looked at a couple of important houses, including this house here, number 15. This was built for Harry and Maud Rose Lores Bonney, and she went on to become an aviator. The story there is that Harry was a cousin of Bert Hinkler. When Bert made his epic flight from England to Australia, solo flight, there was a reception for him at the house, and Mrs. Bonney buttonholed him, talked about flying. At the end, he agreed to give her a little flight in his plane. They went out to Eagle Farm and took her aloft. He said, "Where do you want to go?" She said, "I've got a friend at Urongpilly. I've got some flowers here I'd like to drop to her." She grew roses. So off, he said, "Where's Urongpilly?" She said, "I'll show you." So off they went. She directed him, and there's the house down there. Can we go lower, 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 lower? Things. The lady catches the roses, and at the end of that flight, she'd been bitten by the flying bug, and she thought, "I've got to learn to fly." But her husband wouldn't even let her drive a car, so how was she going to do that? She found, she made contact with a man who was a sort of World War I ace who became a flight instructor. So she would go out to Eagle Farm early in the morning while her husband was out playing golf, and she would have her flying lessons. And when she went solo, the instructor said, "I think it's time you told your husband." So she said, "Harry, I've got something to tell you." And he said, "I already know. So how about we go and buy you an aeroplane?" So I bought her an aeroplane. But she was the kind of woman who was determined not just to sit there with the controls, but she wanted to learn how to fly, how to not only fly the plane, but how to maintain it. So she even made arrangements to go to Archerfield with her lovely designer overalls and learn how to maintain an aeroplane. And so she went on to break some records, and I'll describe the records. In 1932, she became the first female pilot to fly around Australia, and in 1933, she became the first woman to fly solo from Australia to England. So there. And making those record flights, it didn't mean hopping in the aeroplane and just flying. You had to arrange where the petrol drops were. So she had to arrange with, Shell Oil to have some petrol waiting there and there and there and there and there and so on. So she had some close calls. There was a woman who wrote a book about that, and we had a speaker here named Janet Marshall who talked about her flight. Janet was the speaker in February 2020, and that was the last meeting for probably about 6 or 8 months because the pandemic hit just after that. The next building of note is this one here, Tai Shan, and it's been described by an architectural historian as a fine 3-storied, well-appointed brick and render building which ranks among Brisbane's best interwar flats. It was built in 1936 by Mr. Dodds, who had worked in the railways in Rockhampton, and then he was asked to go to China because the British were building a lot of railways in China. So he was there for about 20 years, and he decided to name the building after one of the, the 5 sacred mountains of China. The rendering, I know this fellow, he's just an amateur artist, but I thought he had captured the important buildings on Bowen Hills very nicely. So there's Tai Shan on the left, the church at the back, behind it Cintra. In the front is a building we haven't talked about. It's by a well-known Brisbane architect, Mr. Corrie, and then the Bonney House on the right-hand side. Our next stop was the Miegunyah, built in 1886, and it's now the home of the Queensland Women's Historical Association, and it's the venue for many activities and displays. If you're interested, it's open on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And just beside Miegunyah is a 1934 example of another, residential place. And then when we got to this point, we turned right into the next street, which is Dunlop Street, and we had a look at the remains of the police station, which fronts Breakfast Creek Road. Dunlop Street is the street behind it. The fire was in August 2021, nothing's happened since. The police station was there from about 1919, and in 1915 the area in front of the police station was was occupied by many buildings connected to Eagers Motors. And there were, around 100 or more people employed in those streets. That's a big story on its own. They refer to that as the Eagers Motor Colony. And, the area still has car yards, so there's a sort of a bit of a car vibe in the area. That's a photo from the 1930s. That's Breakfast Creek Road, and I think that's Austin Street there. So we're back on Breakfast Creek Road, and we're almost at the end of our walk, and we turn into Evelyn Street, and the image at the top comes from the 1920s. Evelyn Street, Newstead, is just another, suburban street, but right at the street almost at the end is Gordon Street, and across Gordon Street is a railway line, and this house here is on the corner of Gordon and Evelyn, where the red MG's parked, and just out of the picture is the railway line, and here's the railway line, Gordon Street, and that was the house in 2012. That was the last remaining house in Gordon Street, in Evelyn Street. If you drove up Evelyn Street today, you'd think it's all commercial, all corporate, but that was the last house. And a local artist named Yvonne Mills Stanley, she grew up there with her brother. That's her brother's MG, and the brother took that photo. So there were, even up until about 8 years ago, there was still the railway line there. If you walked along Gordon Street, you could still see the railway line, and there were some paperbark trees there. And because a new building has just been completed, Rendu Towers, which is aged care, little would they suspect that there was a railway line just out on the edge of their building and so on. So we walk along that street, and there we are. We've just reached the end of the trip in record time. We haven't gone over. And we have a cup of coffee at the Lucky Dog Cafe, and we have a chance to contemplate the changing skyline of Skyring Terrace. And if where once upon a time it would have been full of rail yards, piles of coal and so on. And you have to sort of capture this scene in your mind's eye, because month by month it changes, and by this time next year it'll be totally different. So thank you for your attention. I hope that walk wasn't too stressful on you.